A scream tore through the night. The villagers of Okeudo ran to the square, their hearts pounding. Another man was missing, the fourth this week. Whispers of fear spread like wildfire. Was it a wild beast? A curse? Only one person spoke. Uneka, the strange widow who lived by the river, stepped forward. Her voice was steady, her eyes dark with knowing. "I warned you," she said. "The spirits are hungry." No one believed her until the next man vanished. The village of Okeudo was small but full of life. Farmers tilled the land, hunters roamed the forest, and traders filled the market with their goods. Life was peaceful until the disappearances began. First, it was Obinna, the best hunter. Then Kelechi, the blacksmith. Two more men followed, vanishing without a trace. No footprint, no blood, nothing. Fear spread quickly. Elders gathered, women whispered, and children were warned to stay close to home. In the middle of it all stood Uneka, the widow by the river. She had always been different, too quiet, too watchful. Some said she spoke to spirits, others said she carried bad luck. Now she was the only one with answers. "They are calling for justice," she told the elders. "You have angered them." No one listened. That night, another man disappeared. The air in Okeudo grew heavy with fear. No one walked alone. Fires burned through the night, but they did nothing to stop the disappearances. People locked their doors, whispering behind them who would be next. The elders met in hushed voices. Some blamed wild animals, others spoke of enemies from distant villages. Deep down, they all felt it. This was not natural. Then came the strange signs, drums echoing in the distance when no one was playing, shadows moving between trees, vanishing when looked at, a chill in the air even on the hottest days. Then, one night, the village had something new. A deep haunting voice carried on the wind, speaking words no one understood. And just like that, another man was gone. This time, the villagers didn't wait for the others. They ran to the widow's hut by the river. She was already outside, watching them with knowing eyes. "Are you ready to listen now?" she asked. The villagers hesitated. They had always feared Uneka, whispered that she was different, but now, with their men vanishing, fear of the unknown was greater than fear of her. The eldest man, Papa Jide, stepped forward. "If you know something, speak." Uneka's gaze swept over them, her face unreadable. "The spirits of the forest are restless," she said. "They are taking what is old." Murmurs broke out. Some scoffed, some shivered. "Spirits?" Papa Jide's voice was firm. "You speak in riddles, widow. What do they want?" Uneka turned to the forest, the thick shadows swaying as if listening. "A debt was created long ago," she said, "and until it is repaid, they will not stop." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. No one knew of any debt. No one knew what she meant. But before anyone could question her further, a scream shattered the night. It came from deep in the forest, a man's voice, filled with terror. The villagers froze. Then, without warning, Uneka turned and started walking into the darkness. No touch, no weapon, no fear. "Come, if you dare," she said, and then she was gone. No one moved, no one spoke. The villagers stared at the darkness where Uneka had disappeared. The forest had swallowed her whole without a sound. Then another scream, this one closer. Panic broke out. Women clutched their children, men grabbed their spears, but no one dared step forward. Papa Chide's hands trembled. "We cannot let her go alone." "But who would follow?" Who would walk willingly into the same shadows that are stolen their brothers, their fathers, their sons? Then, unexpectedly, Obinna's wife, Adaeze, stepped forward. "I will go," gasp rippled through the crowd. "A woman? Into the cursed forest? If we wait any longer, we will only count more dead," she said, voice shaking but firm. One by one, others found their courage. A hunter, a young warrior, an elder, torches were lit, a small group formed, and together they stepped into the unknown. The forest was not as they remembered. The trees loomed taller, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The air was thick, too thick. Every breath felt heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on them. Then the whispers began. Faint at first, a woman's voice, then a man's, calling names, their names. Adaeze spun around. "Did you hear that?" The others nodded, eyes wide with terror. Something was ahead, a faint glow. The group slowed, creeping forward. The light flickered like fire, but it was cold, blue, unnatural. And then they saw her. Nneka stood in a small clearing, arms raised, her face lifted to the sky. She was speaking, but the words were not hers. Something was speaking through her. Then, as the villagers watched in horror, Nneka's eyes snapped open. "You should not have come." A cold wave rushed through the clearing. The villagers stopped in their tracks. The torches in their hands flickered wildly, then went out. Darkness swallowed them whole. Adaeze's breath came fast. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nneka stared at them, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. Something ancient had taken hold of her. "You were warned," the voice that was not hers said. "The debt must be paid." The villagers shivered. "A debt? What debt?" Then the ground trembled beneath them. A deep guttural growl rose from the shadows. The villagers turned toward the sand, and their blood ran cold. Eyes glowing, unblinking eyes, more than one, dozens surrounding them, watching. A hunter, Ekena, gripped his spear. "We have to leave," his voice wavered. Nneka shook her head slowly. "It is too late." The whispers returned, louder this time, twisting, hissing, calling names. And then one of the missing men stepped forward. The villagers gasped. It was Kelechi, the blacksmith, but something was wrong. His skin was pale, his clothes torn, his eyes, wide and empty, stared straight ahead. He lifted a hand, his fingers bent in an unnatural way, like they had been broken and never healed. "Help me," he whispered. Adaeze took a step toward him. "Kelechi." Then his mouth stretched open, wider than humanly possible, and he screamed, a terrible soul-piercing wail. The ground cracked beneath them. The shadows moved. Then, as if the forest itself had come alive, the creatures attacked. The night exploded. The shadows lunged, twisting and writhing like living smoke. Shapes flickered, half man, half beast, clawing at the villagers. Ekena threw his spear. It passed through one of the creatures like mist. The thing didn't flinch. It wasn't made of flesh. Adaeze grabbed Papachide's arm. "Run!" she screamed, but the forest wouldn't let them. The trees shifted, their roots rising, twisting together to block their way back. They were trapped. The villagers huddled together, weapons shaking in their hands. The creatures circled, closing in. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" The creatures froze. The villagers turned to Nneka. She was glowing. A deep golden light pulsed beneath her skin, as if something ancient had awakened within her. Her lips moved, but her voice wasn't her own. It was layered, many voices speaking as one. "You defied the warning. Now you will listen." The creatures melted into the shadows. The forest fell silent. Nneka turned to the villagers, her eyes like burning embers. A crime was committed long ago, she said. One your ancestors thought was forgotten, but the spirits do not forget. The debt must be repaid. Adaeze swallowed hard. What debt? Nneka raised a hand, and the hair rippled. Suddenly, the villagers saw it, a vision. A time long before theirs, a group of men, warriors from Okeudo, dragging a woman into the forest. She was screaming, begging, but they did not stop. They stole from the gods, Nneka said, her voice heavy with sorrow. They spilled innocent blood on sacred ground, and for generations that sin had remained unpaid. The vision faded. The villagers stood frozen, horror creeping into their bones. Papa Jide's voice cracked. Bet, that was long ago. It was not us. Nneka's gaze darkened. Bloodlines carry sins, just as they carry names. A heavy silence fell. Then the whispers returned, rising, twisting, hissing, and the forest began to move again. The trees groaned like living things. The air thickened, pressing down on the villagers, as if the forest itself had hands, gripping their throats. Then the ground split open. A chasm tore through the clearing, deep and endless. Something moved within it, shapes writhed, twisted faces of the lost men, trapped between worlds, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. Adaeze staggered back, horror filling her chest. Are they? Nneka nodded solemnly. They are neither dead nor alive. The spirits hold them in between until justice is done. Ekena gritted his teeth. Then tell us what to do. We cannot fight what we do not understand. Nneka's glowing eyes flickered. The spirits whispered through her. The debt must be paid in blood. The villagers stiffened. Papa Jide stepped forward, shaking his head. We are innocent. We did not spill blood. Why should we pay? The ground trembled violently. The chasm widened. A strong wind howled through the trees, and from the darkness a single figure emerged, a woman. She was draped in tattered white, her feet floating just above the ground. Her face was terribly familiar. It was the same woman they had seen in the vision, the one who had begged for mercy. Her eyes were dark, endless pits of sorrow and rage. You carry their blood, she whispered. So you carry their sins. The villagers fell to their knees. Some wept, some muttered their spirit prayers. Then the woman lifted her hand, and the spirits began choosing. One by one, villagers felt an unseen force pulling them forward. Their arms locked in place, their feet dragged against the death. No! Adaeze screamed, struggling to hold on to Ekena as he was pulled toward the chasm. The spirits would not stop. Then, just as Ekena's foot reached the edge, Nneka raised her hands and slammed them together. A wave of golden light burst outward. The force holding the villagers snapped. The chosen ones collapsed to the ground, panting in terror. The spirits eased. The ghostly woman turned to Nneka. Why do you stand in our way? Nneka took a deep breath, the glow in her body flickering. If the debt must be paid in blood, then take mine. The villagers gasped. The spirits stilled. The ghostly woman tilted her head, considering. A widow's sacrifice, she murmured, a life-giving rather than taking. The forest groaned, as if the spirits were speaking in a language too deep for human ears. Then the shadows began to fade. The chasm slowly sealed itself. The lost men began to reappear. First Kelechi, then Obinna, then the rest. Weak, shaking, but alive, the villagers sobbed in relief. Adaeze grabbed her husband, holding him tight. But Nneka, she swayed, her glow dimming. She turned to the villagers one last time. "The debt is settled," she whispered. Then, before anyone could reach her, she vanished into the wind. The wind carried away the last traces of Nneka. For a moment, the villagers stood frozen, their minds refusing to accept what had just happened. Then, Adaeze fell to her knees. "No, no, no, no," she sobbed, reaching out as if she could still hold on to Nneka, but there was nothing. Others followed, men, women, grief crashing down like a tidal wave. Papa Jide's voice trembled. "She gave herself for us." Ekena clenched his fist, his eyes burning. "And we never listened to her." Regret filled every heart. Nneka had been right all along, yet they feared her instead of trusting her. Obinna, barely able to stand, gripped Adaeze's shoulder. His voice was weak but steady. "She saved us, all of us." The forest, once suffocating, once filled with nightmares, now felt different. The air was lighter, the trees no longer loomed, the whispers were gone. But the cost, the widow who had walked alone, who had been cast aside, had given her very existence for the people who once feared her. Tears streamed down faces, guilt weighing heavily on them all. Then, slowly, a soft golden glow appeared above them. It flickered gently, hovering like a flame caught in the wind. It circled the villagers, floating past each face as if saying goodbye. When it reached Adaeze, it paused. For a heartbeat, she swore she heard a whisper, soft, familiar. "Live and remember." Then the light faded into the sky. Silence, deep, aching silence. Then Papa Jide did something no one expected. He lowered himself to the earth and pressed his forehead to the ground, a bow of honor. One by one, the villagers followed. The entire village knelt for Nneka. They had once whispered about her in fear. Now they will speak her name with reverence. Nneka, the widow, the outcast, the savior of Okeudo. And from that day forth, whenever the wind whispered through the trees, the villagers would stop, close their eyes, and remember. Because heroes do not always wear crowns. Sometimes they walk among us and sing until the day they choose to shine.